Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining this special meeting of Safe Silver Spring. We appreciate your participation this evening. We've got an exciting program. We've been asked by representatives of the Silver Spring Justice Coalition to join us to share some information about the Freedom to Leave Act, a bill that's been introduced by Council Member Will Jawando, the Montgomery County Council. And the council will have it for its consideration later this fall. So without further ado, I want to turn it over to our host for this evening, Joanna Silver. She's a founding member of the Silver Spring Justice Coalition and one of the most effective community activists and advocates that we have. So Joanna, turning it over to you.
Thank you so much. That's incredible praise coming from you, Alan. I really, really appreciate it. That means a lot. So I'm really a co-host tonight. I'm here tonight with my partners at Young People for Progress, and I'm going to let Jordy Diaz, who's one of their new organizers, introduce himself after I introduce myself and the Silver Spring Justice Coalition. So just to give you a little bit of background, the Silver Spring Justice Coalition is an organization it's a loose coalition, informal. We're not actually even a 501c3, made up of organizations and individuals in the county, including we have some religious organizations, different civic organizations, organizations like CASA, Jews United for Justice, and a lot of individuals. And we were started in 2018 after the death of Robert White, who was a young Black man who was walking in his neighborhood right off of Sligo Creek. He's someone who had a mental health disability and was in a mental health crisis, and he was killed by a police officer. And the community kind of came together to talk about what happened and why it happened and how we could try to reduce the harms of policing in Montgomery County. We do a combination of policy advocacy around legislation like the Freedom to Leave Act. We also work to support families and individuals who've been impacted by harms of policing. You may have seen in the news recently, there was another young man also in a mental health crisis who was killed here in Silver Spring, and we helped to support his family in organizing a vigil so that they could come together and grieve for him, and also make some policy demands and really call out for justice for his loss. So I'm happy, at the end to talk more about my organization, but we're here to talk about the Freedom to Leave Act. So I want to first let my co-presenter Jordy Diaz from Young People for Progress introduce himself. Right before I do that, Jordy, I do also like to say as both a caveat to understand where I'm coming from, and also, I guess, to understand some of my expertise around the issues that we're going to be talking about tonight, is that I obviously am a volunteer with SSJC, but in my professional life, I'm a career public defender. I've worked both in the state and federal systems as a public defender, which is, why these particular issues are of interest to me, and why I like to be able to help other organizations like YPP work on these issues. So let me hand it over to Jordy to introduce himself and YPP.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jordy Diaz. I am actually the new staff member at YPP. YPP started in 2019. We are a community organizing and social justice organization here in Montgomery County. We work primarily with members that are under the age of 35, and we work to create power among youth and young adults. We are very focused on the Freedom to Leave Act, because we're very concerned about how consent searches are impacting young people here in Montgomery County. And I am very excited to talk to you all today about the work that we're trying to do here in Montgomery County.
Thanks, Jordy. And I should say that Young People for Progress really is the lead organization on this bill. SSJC is really following their lead in the advocacy that we've been doing and really trying to support them as much as possible. So I wanted to make sure I highlight that. So let's get into it. So what is the Freedom to Leave Act? So the Freedom to Leave Act would prohibit consent searches of cars and people during traffic stops. And so what that means is that during a traffic stop, a police officer cannot ask the driver or anyone in the car for consent to search the car or consent to search anyone's person in the car. And what that means then is that any searches of a car or a person that happen during a traffic stop have to be based on something other than the driver's consent, another legal basis. And we can get into this in more detail if people have questions, but the most common basis that a police officer has to search a car is what's called probable cause. So probable cause to believe that there is going to be evidence of a crime or contraband found in the car. And so this bill basically says, that's what you need to get into a car. You can no longer get in just by asking for consent to search the car. The other thing it does is that it prohibits police officers from extending the duration of a traffic stop beyond the time that's just needed to what we call effectuate the traffic stop, to write the ticket, to do the thing you stopped the car for. You can't ask for consent to extend the duration of the traffic stop. And what that often looks like is you're stopped, the officer writes you a ticket and says, I'm all done here, you're free to go, but do you mind if I ask you some more questions? So this bill would prohibit that as well. And then finally, the bill requires the collection of certain data related to traffic stops that's not already being collected. As I'm about to go into, a lot of the racial disparities in traffic stops and some of the harms around traffic stops and searches during stops have been revealed through the collection of data, but through the collection and analysis of traffic stop data that's been done here at the county level. And at the state level, we've seen a number of deficiencies in the areas of data collection. And so this bill also seeks to require a more robust collecting of data. So, and I said this in case you missed this before, I said to Alan, if you have questions, put them in the chat. And it's a little challenging to look at the chat and my notes at the same time, but I'll try to do that. And if I don't see a question as I'm going that is relevant, we'll definitely have time to get to questions at the end. So the Freedom to Leave Act began as really one way of responding to significant race-based disparities in traffic enforcement in Montgomery County. Many of you may have heard of a fairly compelling report that was issued by our county's Office of Legislative Oversight, setting out these disparities a few years ago. And so what I first want to do before we talk about, what happens during consent stops and some of the harms of consent stops is to really explain the relationship between racial disparities in traffic enforcement and consent stops. So again, the data shows that here in Montgomery County, as in around the country, Black and brown folks are stopped at far higher rates than white people. And there is absolutely no data to support the conclusion that that's because they're bad drivers. There's just none. And we know that's not true, right? So what drives this disparity is this concept that a lot of folks are familiar with called pretext stops. And that's a stop based on the sometimes often implicit bias of the police officer that if they stop a Black driver, they are more likely to find something in that car. And this is something that we just know from common sense. We also know it because the police will tell us this. This is it is a common tool that police have. In our new police chief, Mark Yamada's community conversations that we were participants in, he actually said in his communication with us that they will do more traffic enforcement in downtown Silver Spring, not because there's worse driving in downtown Silver Spring, but because crime rates are higher. So they will use traffic enforcement to backdoor in crime rates. And that's where these pretext stops come in. And the relationship between pretext stops and consent searches is that the only way the only purpose of actually engaging in that pretext stop to investigate and try to find things is if you can get into the car. So having the ability to use a consent search to get into someone's car incentivizes these traffic stops. And we saw that in the data in Montgomery County, this OLO, the Office of Legislative Affairs report that I mentioned earlier, showed that from 2018 to 2022, there were like over 30,000 searches during traffic stops, and 74% of those searches were of Black or Latinx community members. And during that same period, Black and Latinx folks constituted less than 40% of our population. And during that same time, Black and Latinx drivers constituted 67.5% of all searches based on consent. So that is insignificant disparity with their actual numbers in the population. And this data mirrors national data. So data around the country shows routinely that Black and brown drivers are asked for consent to search their cars, to have their cars searched more often than white drivers. So again, the point of a pretext stop, which is what drives racial disparities in traffic enforcement, is to get into a car. And when police officers don't have probable cause to do that, they fall back on consent searches. So I want to take a minute to show you a video, and hopefully my share screen will work, that really illustrates what a consent search looks like and what this whole kind of from the beginning to that actually cuts out before the end, but just give you a sense of, you know, what it is that police officers are doing when they're trying to get into someone's car. And it also does a really good job of really illustrating some of the impact of these stops on the drivers who are targeted. So I am going to see if I can do this. Let us see.
Get in a car? Do you know how to get in a car?
You want me to get in this car?
Yeah. Do you know how to do it? Okay. So you're gonna ask him questions. You want to see if he's ever been stopped by the police. So it's kind of standard. Have you ever been stopped by the police?
Yeah.
And then go into specifics. Traffic, civil, criminal. Ever been locked up before? If the answer to all those questions are no, have you ever had any police contact? Ever been part of a report? All right. Based upon that, anything illegal in the car, guns, drugs, bazooka, dead body in the trunk. Sounds ridiculous? Most people hear dead body. Nah. Can I get consent? There you go. Work it out.
So you have anything in your car at this time?
No, I don't have anything but
drugs,
no.
guns, dead bodies, anything like that?
Whoa.
I mean, it sounds
really?
crazy, man.
Whoa, nah, I got lamps and stuff that's helping her move. In my work, I do maintenance. My stuff is in my trunk, is my tools for work. That's it.
You mind if we take a look in? Mind if I take a look in?
I don't see why. I don't think that would be necessary.
Oh, no, I was just asking, man, because, you know, you say you don't have anything
I can open my trunk for you if that's what you want to see. There's a lamps and moving stuff on the inside, that's it. But I mean, if you want to look at my trunk, you want to look at my trunk?
All right, that's cool.
All right.
I was trying to talk him through consent, but he didn't let the dude reach back in the car, pop the trunk, so I have no idea where they are in the middle of getting consent.
Okay.
But can you unfuck this up?
Yeah, they got K9 right up the street.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
I mean, we could give them the, cool.
Okay, oops. All right, now you guys saw all the YouTube videos that my teenager looks at, so sorry about that. Hopefully someone would have pinged me if you weren't able to see or hear that. But I want to make sure you all understand what you just saw there. It's really a very classic textbook example of what happens during a police stop, where the their officer's goal is to get in the car, and they try every way they can. What we saw at the beginning was a supervising officer training a new officer about how to try to get into someone's car. And they started by telling them to ask some questions that would have developed that actual lawful basis to get in. And then if you don't have that lawful basis, you move to consent. And you could see the types of suggestions she was giving for how to manipulate the person into giving consent, to say like, well, we know you don't have any dead bodies in the car. So that's sort of like upping the ante to say like, you have nothing to hide, let us in. And meaning that's the sort of thing we're looking at. And maybe if you have a bag of weed or something, not weed anymore, but something small, we won't care, right? So it's that sort of manipulation. And then you can also see here, start to see some of the harms. So you saw the stop started with one police car. And by the end, I mean, how many were there? At least I counted at least 4. This is on the side of, this is up on Georgia Avenue in Glenmont, actually, of a really busy road. You can see that the driver is wearing his work uniform. He references he's on his way to work. So, and they were out there for a significant period of time. So thinking about the delays that he was that were caused to him, when Jordy talks about some of the harms, I mean, people like literally there's the emotional impact of going through what that person just did, standing on the side of the road for all of that time, being surrounded by police, the financial impact of possibly being late to work and losing your job. So it's just, I think it's a really good illustration of what we're talking about here. Let me just get my notes back up. Hold on one second. I think that is it for me. So I think what I'm going to do is, now that we really saw what a consent search looks like and started to get a little bit of a taste of the harms that these searches can cause, I'm going to turn it over to Jordy to talk about why consent searches are not effective and a little bit more about the harms that they cause.
Okay, so I wanted to give some statistics that we have found. For example, in 2022, less than half of 1% of all traffic stops result in gun seizures in Montgomery County. Looking just at consent searches, in 2023, only 5% of all consent searches resulted in finding any contraband at all. This shows that traffic enforcement generally is a bad way to fight crime. Data from the country is also similar. A study in Oregon showed that limiting consent searches decreased unnecessary searches and made the searches that did take place more likely to yield a positive result. The bottom line is that fishing expeditions usually do not pan out, and you don't see them actually resulting in stopping much crime. Also, what we have found is that consent searches also cause harm. Consent searches are not truly consensual, as we saw in the video. They're manipulative. What we see is that consenting is a survival tactic from those that are stopped. It is not a choice. There is a power imbalance between both parties, which makes it not consensual, particularly for members of marginalized communities. We see that with research that even advising people of their right to refuse consent does not shift this balance. Anecdotal evidence is clear also that there are many individual stories that we have heard that support the fact that people do not feel that they can say no. Immigrant drivers also face additional challenges. There are language barriers and fears related to their immigration status, making them more vulnerable to coercion during these searches. And data from Montgomery County supports this, where in 2023, there were 291 requests for consent and 268 were granted. There were only 23 declined, and which shows that only 8% of drivers refused a request to search. Consent searches also put a strain on resources for police officers. They take away from real traffic enforcement and targeted criminal investigation that is actually most likely to result in results. There's also harm from being held on the side of the road while police are trying to get you to consent to a search. This harm manifests itself in different ways, which include psychological problems and financial problems. They could result as job loss. If you're on the side of the road, you're trying to get to your job and they're trying to get consent from you. and also unnecessary traffic tickets, which can put strain on people's finances. There are also physical problems due to traffic stops, which can be deadly. In Montgomery County, Black and Latinx people were the targets of 80% of all use of force incidents in 2020. And that manifests itself also in psychological toll that driving while Black or Latinx causes, generally speaking, because of the increased likelihood that you will be pulled over and held on the side of the road, searched, and possibly harmed. All of this leads to an erosion in community trust in the police, makes people less likely to report crimes that they're a victim of, and or to act as a witness and want to cooperate in any way with law enforcement. And I guess we can move on to any questions.
I see one hand up there. Are you raising your hand? Let's see.
Well,
Yeah,
I've got some questions, and
Yeah,
please, people don't be shy. Ask questions. Take advantage of this opportunity because these are subject matter experts on this particular subject. So my first question was in the video that we saw where the gentleman was stopped up in Glenmont on Georgia Avenue. Do you know the reason for the stop? You know what the pretext was?
I don't know the pretext of that. I don't know what the basis was for that traffic stop, no. But it was a traffic violation.
And then the follow-up question is if I think Jordy just said 8% in some time period were people who did not consent to search. What happens typically when somebody doesn't consent to a search from law enforcement?
So what is supposed to happen is law enforcement is supposed to say, okay, thank you, have a nice day. And I think what we saw in that video is what actually happens. Because he basically he wasn't consenting. So they kept him there. And I meant to mention this when I was talking about the video. I don't know if you all heard them mention a canine nearby. So earlier when I talked about the fact that this bill prohibits the police from from asking for consent to extend the duration of a traffic stop, one thing that is very common is for police to find a reason to keep you on the side of the road to have enough time to bring a drug sniffing dog to the car, because it is lawful. It is not a search for the police to walk a drug sniffing dog around your car. And then if the dog alerts on your car, that is probable cause to search the car. So if the police can find a way to keep you there for enough time to get a canine, then they will, that is something that they do. So technically, if you say, no, I'm not consenting to the search, they're supposed to let you go. But what often does happen, and what did happen in that case, is that they'll keep digging. They'll keep asking questions to try to build up. This is a granular legal issue concept, but if the officer does not ask for consent to extend the duration of the traffic stop, then what the officer needs is what's called reasonable suspicion, which is like less than probable cause. It's some suspicion to believe that there's some criminal activity afoot to keep you there. So they can't search your car on that basis, but if they can start to say, oh, the person looked nervous, or the driver and the passenger gave conflicting stories about where they were going, that can actually give the police lawful permission to keep you there a little bit longer. So that is, again, when, as I mentioned in that video, when the one officer was training the other about the sorts of questions to ask to start digging for, it was meant to kind of find a lawful basis to keep you there, to then either ask for consent or keep you there even longer until you could finally possibly develop probable cause.
We've got a couple other questions. Let's go first to Brenda and then to Dan. Brenda, your question?
I have a couple of questions. The first one was, why was this fellow stopped? Was it stopped due to a traffic violation? Because I wonder, police just don't stop you when you're driving?
It was a traffic violation, and I can look it up. I just don't remember offhand
Okay,
But I can look it up, but it was, it was definitely a traffic violation. It was 100% a traffic violation.
all
Yeah.
right. Well, here is my concern, and it's not about, and I don't like police bothering people, but there are so many terrible drivers in downtown Silver Spring. People are making right-hand turns out of the left lane. I mean, there's all sorts of things that go on. So while I don't like the idea of just picking on people, I do not support the idea of them not going into traffic violations and actually ticketing the people. I don't want them to hold them forever, but that's a concern that I have.
Sure. And so this bill this bill doesn't prevent police from making traffic stops, but it really, the hope is that it encourages police to actually stop people who are engaging in because they're engaging in bad driving, not because they hope that they're going to get in their car and find some drugs. So that is the goal of this bill. But I will also tell you that the Office of Legislative Oversight report that I referenced before actually showed that there are greater racial disparities in the non-safety related traffic stops. So the, broken tail light, cracked windshield, obscured license plate, things like that, or like a, poorly hanging tag. Those, what we call non-safety related traffic stops, were the places where you found more racial disparities in traffic enforcement. And that is because those are the sorts of, pretext, the bases for these pretext stops. Nobody in the Silver Spring Justice Coalition or Young People for Progress, has any desire to stop police from stopping dangerous drivers. And the goal of this bill is, and any bill that really seeks to constrain police from any non-safety traffic enforcement, is to push them to focus their enforcement on the safety related traffic violations, for sure. I see your question mark, but Daniel has a question, so I want to let him answer. And Jordy, please jump in if you have an answer, so I'm not like monopolizing.
So you're ready, Dale.
Oh, can you hear me?
We hear you, Dale.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So you're not really telling the whole story about this bill. From my understanding, the police are going to be handcuffed from stopping expired tags, stopping broken tail light, broken headlamp. Those are safety issues. And I was stopped behind a car in a red light about a month ago at a red light, and the car in front of me had a tag that was November 2020. I just can't believe that, which means that for 4 years it's not been registered. And there's a very, very good chance that this person doesn't have insurance. These are safety issues. A broken tail light, particularly at night, and it's raining, is a very, very dangerous thing. And I cannot believe that this bill, which you didn't mention any part of, that the police are going to be prevented from stopping these kind of violations. These are safety issues. Particularly driving at night when you've got one headlamp or one tail light, you think it could be a motorcycle, it's raining, and a tag that's expired for 4 years. Come on, you're not telling the whole truth about this bill. It is a matter of safety. And another thing I want to make another point I want to make is the Fourth Amendment prevents what's the word?
Unreasonable.
Unreasonable.
Search. The Fourth Amendment is already in our laws. And if we got a bad cop somewhere that's harassing somebody, then that person can turn around and just sue the county for improper improper search. So I can't believe that you're pulling this off. This is a matter of safety. There are hundreds and hundreds that I have of cases of traffic stops that result in illegal drugs and illegal handguns, and you're saying that it's going to be okay to let these people go and let these drugs remain on the streets. These are safety issues. I don't know what color that person was that was driving in front of me. I couldn't tell. I even made a point of trying to figure out what color the person was. The idea was somebody was driving with a tag expired 4 years ago. This is unreasonable. This is handcuffing the police. This is wrong. This is really wrong. I understand your point about the racial thing and all of that. Then those people have the power to turn around and sue the county for improper search, period.
So I really appreciate you asking this question, because it gives me an opportunity to clarify that this bill is not about, does not limit traffic stops. There was another bill that was introduced by Councilmember Jawando that was withdrawn because the Attorney General of the state of Maryland issued an opinion saying that local governments are not legally authorized to limit traffic enforcement, to actually tell police what traffic violations they can and can't stop people for. And so that bill, which was called the STEP Act, was actually withdrawn. But the Attorney General expressly said that localities can still tell police officers what they can do after a traffic stop, and specifically did say that they can limit police from asking for consent to search during traffic stops. So I'm glad you asked that question, so we can make it really, really clear that this is the Freedom to Leave Act, and all it does are the three things that I talked about at the beginning, which is it bans consent searches during traffic stops, it bans consensually extending the duration of a traffic stop, and it requires additional data collection. I do also appreciate you bringing up the really important point about, well, why don't people, if something bad happens, like, why don't people just sue? So I will tell you that the video we saw was one of the very rare cases that does result in a lawsuit. But what I can also tell you is that every single time I have ever sat down in a room to talk about this bill or something like this bill, and that there have been either Black men, often Black women, or people who are married to and live with Black men, every single time they will tell me about times that they were stopped unlawfully, treated unfairly, stopped in a way that they believe very clearly was because of the color of their skin or the color of the skin of their passenger. And there was no way in the world that they were going to file a complaint or sue, because they knew that the likelihood of it going anywhere was so slim. And just because of really the emotional toll of what it means to walk around in this world, having that color skin and knowing that you are so susceptible to being stopped and treated in a way that someone else wouldn't, that it is really, really rare for people to complain. And it is hard. The harms that we talked about, that Jordy talked about, often they're psychic. There are times that people literally lose their jobs. Sometimes it is just a psychological toll of that happening over and over and over again. And it is hard to successfully win a lawsuit on that basis. But I'd invite anyone who's here tonight who is not me, because I'm not the person that I'm talking about. I have a lot of skin privilege, and that doesn't happen. I don't get stopped, and these things don't happen to me when I am stopped. If there's anyone else here tonight who wants to address that personally, I really invite you to do that. I don't want to speak for anyone. But I hope I answered those questions for you. Mark, Pastor asked what the county executive's position is on this bill, and he is not supporting the bill. His position is that he wants to continue to control consent searches through just requiring his police officers to get the consent in writing, and to inform people of their right to refuse consent. And he and his upper echelon leadership, Earl Stoddard is the person we've been working with on this bill, have been really looking at the language of the consent search form and trying to tweak it a little bit to make it better. And I just have a couple of responses to that position, which is that there is research, pretty compelling research, and I'm gonna put a link to a document where I compiled some of the research we have, showing that even when people are told of their right to refuse consent, they still consent. It's a psychological phenomena that it's really hard to understand until you're in that position. But when someone in power, who has that authority relationship with you, asks you for consent, even if they tell you you can say no, people don't say no. People say yes. And again, anecdotally, I can't tell you how many times I've been in presentations where people will say, I know it's not a choice for me. I have a member of Silver Spring Justice Coalition who happens to have raised two boys, one who is white and one who is Black. And when she has talked with her Black son about this and really listened to her white and Black sons talking together, the difference is really stark, where her Black son said, it's just not really a choice. Like, it's not safe for me to do that, to assert that right, even if I know I have it. So that is our and SSJC's position and YPP's position, that just telling people of their right to refuse consent is not going to solve the problem. Margie, I'm sorry, Margie. I just spoke for Margie, whose hand is raised. I apologize, Margie. I didn't even see you there.
It's okay. That's fine.
Oh my God. Margie's our member whose personal story I just shared.
No, it's fine. It's totally fine.
Only because I know you've shared that publicly before, so.
My son's permission, yeah. But I really am in support of this bill. And just to answer a couple of the questions and some of the things that came through, people asked why are people stopped? He has been stopped for things that I would never be stopped for. He had his Montgomery College parking thing hanging from the rear view mirror. Now, people drive around this county all the time with things hanging from it. This was a college parking thing. He got stopped for that. He got stopped. The last one was the craziest thing I ever heard. They stopped him and told him they thought he didn't have insurance. Well, we pay his insurance automatically. So they called us and we were checking his wrong car. We looked at the last car. Well, why were you following him? I mean, what did that make? So in proof, just to answer people's questions that everybody must be being stopped for a reason, of all the times he stopped, he hasn't gotten tickets. So, but he has been put to the side of the road with his little daughter, made to sit on the side of the road while 5 police cars have come, which means they're not doing anything else. Have, completely thrown everything out on the road. And he does not feel comfortable saying, no, you cannot search my car. As a young Black man, he doesn't feel comfortable not giving consent. And I asked him too, whether he felt that just doing, signing for it would make a difference. And he said no. And actually, he's a much better driver than my white son, who doesn't get stopped. Not like that. So I just wanted to say that it's not because somebody's doing something terrible that they're getting stopped. These are pretext stops, and they are for things that would never, ever get stopped for. So I just wanted to say I'm in support of this bill, and I'm really pleased with YPP for taking the lead on it. It's a great organization. That's it. Thanks. Thanks for calling on me.
Thank you, Margie. I'm so glad you're here and you can speak for yourself. So thank you.
Don't worry about that. It's okay.
Brenda, do you have a question? Brenda, do you want to follow up? There you go.
Yes, I do have a clarification. I noticed that the name of your group is Young People Preferred. Now, I'm wondering if this is primarily targeting young people. I have never been stopped in my life. I am not a good driver. I don't drive a whole lot. But I'm wondering if this essentially is targeting youth or young white people, young, of the same age. Are they stopped as much as young Black people? I'm not just talking about this particular lady, because she's in a very interesting position where she can really, balance. But how common is that the Blacks or Latinos or whatever are stopped more than young white people?
Jordy, do you want to take that?
Sure. So it's very common that both Black young people and Latinx people are targeted specifically with uh, stops and the use of force incidents. One statistic that we said was that in 2022, Latinx people and Black people were targeting of 80% of all use of force incidents. So also a lot of our members have experiences with being stopped by police, specifically young people of color. We see them being stopped, particularly while they're going towards school. For example, like we heard in Montgomery College, going to Montgomery College, that's where we have a lot of our members where we hear incidents of this happening. So that's we noticed that it's particularly happening to students of color, and they're very they're pretty much fed up with it. That's why they're deciding to be members of YPP, trying to get more involved because they are really they just don't want to be stopped all the time, just trying to get to school or trying to go to work. It's something that's really affecting them.
And Jordy is newer to YPP, but the reason that YPP has prioritized this kind of legislation is from talking to their members, is from talking to young people in the community. Like and that's why we follow the lead of YPP on this, because they are the ones who are on the ground talking to, because you're absolutely right, Brenda. It is, all of these issues around policing that impact Black and brown folks more always impact younger Black and brown folks more. Those are the folks who are targeted. And that's why YPP is such a great organization to be leading this effort. But it comes from the community. It comes from they're out there talking to young people, high schoolers and in college as well, and folks in their 20s. And that's really where their decision to prioritize this kind of legislation came from. Eric, I read your question in the chat, and I think it's a really important question. Like that is really the issue here, and that is what people who oppose the bill will say, is that we need to give the police every tool in the toolbox. Like this is not a time to to hamstring them, etc. And we definitely understand that there are in some areas increases in crime. The data honestly shows that those areas are actually only a couple, but certainly at least the narrative right now and the kind of feeling we understand in the community is that people have a greater concern about crime. But our belief is that this bill actually is a public safety bill. This bill really will force police officers to target their enforcement to the people and places where they actually have cause to be searching. And all of the research shows our data from from Montgomery County that Jordy cited, and then data that I'll share in this document with you from around the country, that these consent searches are not effective tools. So out of the, in the most recent data we have from Montgomery County, 5% of all of these searches yielded any contraband whatsoever. And in the data from a couple of other jurisdictions that I'll share with you, it actually showed that when consent searches decreased, the efficacy of non-consent searches, like probable cause searches, increased. So our goal is, and this is when you're talking to your neighbors about this bill, which we hope you will, and we're going to share some resources of how you can take action in support of the bill. that you'll explain this to them. Like, this is not, it is certainly possible that police feel it's going to impact them. And I think that may be just because this is something that's just it's been part of policing for such a long time. But the fact is, it doesn't work. And that is why these reforms are happening around the country. So Silver Spring Justice Coalition and Young People for Progress and Councilmember Jawando are not at the forefront of this movement. I mean, there's been legislation passed around the country in a number of states, in a number of localities. And also there are a number of police departments that on their own through policy have limited the use of consent searches because they know that it is a tool for racial discrimination, and that they're not effective. So I hope that answered your question, Eric.
I've got a question.
Go ahead,
So
Evan.
could you mention, I know that when I passed around the policy note from the Jawando office, it mentioned that other jurisdictions were working on legislation, had passed legislation related to this. Can you just mention, since I'm not looking at that now, I couldn't find it just as I was taking this opportunity to ask this question. Can you just tell us what some of those other jurisdictions are? I saw New Jersey was.
New Jersey is one. Connecticut is another. Connecticut has like one of the strongest ones. The Oregon Supreme Court limited the use of consent searches, and that was actually the basis for one of the studies that we have in our research, because it was after the limitation of that consent search that the searches that were done became more effective, efficacious. And then there are a number of local police departments. I can also put that in a document to share that have limited it as well. And then there's legislation pending in a number of places as well.
So the follow-up to that question is, in those places where there's been a decrease in consent searches, was there also a decrease in the use of force? Sort of interested in
That's a really interesting question. And I don't know.
Because Jordy mentioned that what was the number? 8%, Jordy, of the Montgomery County study period, that 8% of these stops ended up use of force situations, incidents. And I'm wondering whether or not there's any kind of relationship between not consenting, decrease in consent searches, and the increase or decrease in use of force cases.
So just to clarify, that 8% data point was that only 8% of drivers who were asked for consent in Montgomery County, now that we're keeping track, like where we're keeping track of who's asked, refused the request. That's the 8% data point. The use of force data point that Jordy shared was just about rates of force, racial disparities in the use of force, generally speaking, in Montgomery County, just to kind of drive home the fact that when a Black or brown person is stopped, they are at greater risk of harm, period, based on the fact that there's such racial disparities in our use of force. I don't have that's a really interesting data point question, Alan, and I haven't seen that particular inquiry, but I have a feeling it's out there. So I will continue to look and see if there's any data from around the country on decreases in use of force that correlate to decreases in consent searches.
Dan or Dale, got a question? Dale?
Thank you. Two questions. Number one, I never got really any response about making the point that we have a Fourth Amendment to prevent illegal searches. So that I'd like you to elaborate on. How does this differ from the Fourth Amendment of our Constitution? And number two, how does our own police force feel about this bill? Have you worked with them, or is this just something you've left them out of?
Sure. So I'll answer the second part first. So Councilmember Joanna's office has been in communication with the FOP and with police management, and they do not support the bill, but it is definitely something that they've talked to them about. And the data requirement piece of the bill is something that they specifically asked to get their feedback on. I think they were anticipating that they would not support the bill, but they did reach out to them about it, and then they did specifically solicit feedback on the data point. In terms of the Constitution, you are 100% right, Dale. The judicial interpretations of the Fourth Amendment allow police officers to ask for consent. So that is why consent searches currently happen, because if someone tells a police officer that they can search their car or their home or anything, then you're outside of the Fourth Amendment. You don't need anything else. But the Constitution, hopefully you guys have heard this concept before, the Constitution is a floor. It's a floor. It actually says the minimum protection that a government must afford its citizens. And it is very common for local jurisdictions and states, and at times the federal government through statute, to increase that floor, to actually provide their citizens with a higher level of protection because the people believe that that's necessary. And this is exactly what that bill does. There is, again, I'll drop the link in the chat as soon as I get a breath. You'll see this is around the country. Basically, it is limiting consent searches is a very, very common avenue of police reform around the country in thinking about ways that we can make people safer in terms of crime protection while decreasing the harms that come from policing. Consent searches, adding that additional layer of protection beyond what the Constitution requires, is something that has just become very, very common when people are talking about ways of reforming policing in this country. So I hope that, helps to explain that difference between the Constitution. There's so many areas that our Constitution permits, like the whole qualified immunity. There's so many things where we basically choose to give individuals protection under state law or jurisdictions. There are some state constitutions that are more protective than the federal Constitution. So this is definitely, it is doing that. It is adding a protection that the Constitution doesn't currently give us.
So I have a question. Just Dale, let me ask this question first. So
Sure.
Joanna, as I understand it, if you have a Maryland driver's license, you applied and one is issued for you, do you have a statutory responsibility to take a sobriety test if they pull you over under suspicion of intoxication, driving under the influence? And I was wondering, because I think that you're supposed to submit to sobriety tests if they pull you over and you've got a driver's license. Is there anything similar for consent searches that goes along with having a driver's license in the state of Maryland? And then, so I guess that's the question that I have, and I guess follow up to that is there any reasonable expectation of privacy for being in a motor vehicle out on a public highway?
Sure. Okay. So the first is this is digging into when I used to be a state public defender that I recall this, but I do think it's correct that if you refuse a sobriety test, I think your license can be suspended. That's my recollection, but please don't quote me on that. So certainly our state legislature, I'm trying to, if our state legislature tried to pass a bill saying that by obtaining a driver's license, you preemptively consent to police searching your car without probable cause, I think that would not be constitutional. Okay. Honestly, I think that would be very, very susceptible to legal challenge. You 100% have a reasonable expectation of privacy in the contents of your car and in the contents of whatever is on your person. And that is why, without consent, the police officer needs probable cause to search your car. Now, the difference with between a car and a home, and again, this is getting lawyer talk, so bear with me, is that in the home, you also need a warrant. So police can't just come into your home because they have probable cause. They need a search warrant. But a car, because it is movable, there's what's called the automobile exception to the warrant requirement. So that is why police officers do not need, they could get a search warrant to search your car, but they don't need that. All they need is to be able to articulate probable cause to believe that contraband or other evidence of a crime will be inside the car.
What about plain sight?
Plain view is an except. So yeah, so plain view can provide probable cause. So 100%, this happens all the time. If that video that we saw had been at night, you would have seen the police officers with flashlights flashing their lights inside the car, which feels like a search, but because it's a flashlight is a kind of non-sophisticated mechanism of technology that they can use. If they saw a gun in the car, that would be probable cause to search the car.
Thank
They
you.
definitely do that. And that is definitely like when they're sitting around trying to keep you on the side of the road, asking questions, poking around, they are looking for things like that. And the fact is, if they see it, then they can get in the car. I mean, nobody is saying that if they see a gun in a car, they shouldn't be able to get in. Unless, there's evidence that the person has, a permit or some permission to have it.
Thank you for those answers.
Sure.
So we're looking
Any
forward
other
to
questions?
seeing some of that information. I'll be happy to circulate
Yep. So
it.
what I'm gonna do is, I am going to put right now in the chat a Google Doc that you can all access that has some of the research that we talked about. And Brenda, you are right. This issue is complex. And our hope is that this is one little step that will make a difference, both in decreasing the harms and also in promoting safety. So this document's there. And then the other thing I wanted to share for those of you who, well, obviously we hope that at least some of you here, upon hearing this presentation, are interested in supporting this bill. And if you are, we actually have a petition that I'm going to put a link to that petition in the chat that you can sign to let our council know that you support the bill. And then I'm also putting a link to an RSVP if you want to join us. So the next step in the legislative process for this bill is what's called the work session that is going to be in the Public Safety Committee of the County Council, and that is going to be on Monday, September 16th. I believe the council session starts at 9 o'clock, so it'll be at 100 Maryland Avenue in Rockville. And the bit.ly link I just put in the chat is for you to join us at the council session to show your support for the bill. And we're also going to be having a press conference afterwards, so we would love to have you there. But most importantly, we would love it if you would sign the petition. We also have an email alert, action alert that I didn't grab the link for, but you can also just, any of you can email any of your council members and let them know that you support this bill. But we've been sending emails for a while now, and so we shifted to this petition as we get a little bit closer. So please do share that with folks. Robin, go ahead.
Yeah, I noticed that there was a note from Eric in the chat.
I thought I answered his.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Yeah, about the issues with crime in his neighborhood. But Alyssa, I didn't see your note. So let me hold on a second. I apologize.
It's okay. I think we corresponded about this at the time, actually.
Oh, yes. And your name looks familiar to me. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Just basically chiming in to say, because I had seen like kind of the direction of the comments saying like, we need more policing. What are we supposed to tell people about why we wouldn't want more policing? I feel like I have a particular lived experience of ways that more of the same does not yield the results that we might want. The circumstance that I was describing in the chat is one where, the person who was shot was not a completely innocent actor. He had committed a crime earlier in the evening. He was being chased by police, and the result was a shootout that took place in front of my home. But it was extremely traumatizing. And the root cause solutions do not consist of adding more of what we've already got. It seems very obvious to me. So that was all that I had hoped to add.
That was the shooting on Wayne Avenue. That
Yes.
started in downtown Silver Spring.
Yes, it was.
I'm really sorry that that happened, and I really appreciate you sharing that with everyone. I do think, and oh, Eric is still there. I think there's a difference between feeling safe. First of all, having extra police around makes some people feel safe, and it makes some people feel unsafe. So there's that balance to begin with.
Yeah.
But there's also the difference between feeling safe and actually being safer. And I think that's part of what we at Silver Spring Justice Coalition and also at YPP try to talk to people about, is that like there's a difference between that feeling of safety and what actually makes us safe. And I think there's a saying in the organizing community that like we keep us safe. And there are a lot of different ways to actually increase safety and to increase the feeling of safety that we believe involve fewer of the harms that having an increased police presence when it's not needed can involve. And I think we all want police to be investigating shootings and investigating violent crime. And this bill is meant to really encourage them to be doing that. I mean, especially if, as we keep hearing, that police hiring is down and all of that. So this is really a way to push them to be more efficient, to focus on what we should be focusing on.
Are there any more
Jordy, is there
questions?
anything else you wanted to add?
Well, I'm going to circulate this. I'm going to post it at least to our Facebook page and put on our website, so it'll be there as a resource. I just wanted to thank you and Jordy for being here this evening and sharing your experience and your understanding of the issues. Dale, do you have a question you wanted to ask?
I just wanted to know, have you analyzed how many guns and how much drugs are off the streets because of traffic stop confiscating drugs and guns? I really get what you're trying to do. I really do. It is unfair to be driving while black and worried about it. I really do get that. But, I still also do not want them thumbing their nose at the police when they've got drugs and guns, anyway, do you get it?
Absolutely, 100%. I do get it. And that's what we're trying to explain and talking about, the fact that these consent searches are not efficient and that traffic stops themselves are not an efficient way to get guns and drugs off the street. So again, the data, I don't think we shared this data tonight, but in 2022, out of all traffic stops, 0.5% of all traffic stops yielded a firearm. So 0.5% of all traffic stops in Montgomery County in 2022 yielded a firearm. And we didn't have that data for contraband. We still don't have the data for contraband, generally speaking, meaning drugs, for all traffic stops. But again, the reason we shared, we do have the data on consent searches, and that was that even when you shrink it down to the consent searches, only 5% of all consent searches resulted in finding guns or contraband. So combined, other meaning drugs or something else. In one of the cases, it was like they found evidence of a theft crime. So we all want guns and drugs off our streets. But this is, again, just not an efficient way to do it. And the research, particularly the research I share in the document, shows that if you make police officers wait to search until they have probable cause, and to focus their stops and their searches on people who they can articulate probable cause for, they are more likely to find something and then be successful in doing what we want them to do, which is to get the guns and the drugs off the street. So I hope that, I don't know, I know there's not going to completely reassure, but I hope it did a little bit.
So what about this scenario? So somebody is driving up Wayne Avenue in their Toyota Supra. It's bright red. They make a left. They go through. They make a left-hand turn going south on Georgia Avenue. They go through the red light, and they speed down Georgia Avenue toward the DC line. Go through another red light. Cop sees them, pursues them, pulls them over. So they've committed a couple of, I guess, crimes there. I don't know if crime is the right word.
Serious traffic infractions, which they're misdemeanors in Maryland. So
serious traffic infractions, misdemeanors of, going through the red light and speeding down Georgia Avenue. So when they get pulled over under this scenario, the police would not be able to. So they seem like they'd be a bad guy, right? They'd seem like there's something going on there. Assuming there's not alcohol or drugs, could that automatically go to a search, or do they have to ask the driver for a consent search? And then if they refuse, what's the disposition of that situation? Do they just get arrested, or they just get ticketed?
So, no. So just because someone is speeding and driving recklessly, I mean, I think that is no. So they would have to actually they'd either have to ask for consent to search the car, or they would have to, ask the questions and see if they could develop reasonable suspicion to keep them there. So you seem like you're in a rush. Where are you guys going? Have you been drinking? Like all those things, ask those questions to develop what's called reasonable suspicion to keep them there longer, and keep asking questions, shine the flashlight in the car, do their work. And if there's nothing that's coming up, then no, they shouldn't be able to search their car. I mean, if during that interaction, they haven't developed probable cause to search their car, speeding is a ticketable offense, and driving through a red light is a ticketable offense. It does not mean you should be giving up your reasonable expectation of privacy in your car.
Just wanted to ask.
Yeah.
Because
they can certainly do some investigation to ask those questions.
Yeah, because somebody in that situation is probably not going to consent for a search of their automobile.
Well, maybe not. Although, I guess what our data shows is that they probably would, though. Actually, I say maybe not. I mean, actually, the data is quite clear that they probably will.
And then there's a dead body in the car.
Only 8% of them won't, right?
Right.
And I'll also tell you, as a public defender, because I see the cases where they do find things in the car, people often consent when there are things in the car. I mean, it's just hard to overstate the dynamic there. So.
Any other questions from the group? Again, Jordy and Joanna, thank you so much for sharing this information and bringing this issue to this group. We'll share this information on social media, and we'll put links to the documents that you shared with us this evening. Our regular meeting, this is a special meeting of Safe Silver Spring. Our regular meeting, our next one is going to be October 24th with the new commander of the 3rd District, Jason Kokinos. Have you met him yet? Our Dave McBain has been promoted. He's an assistant chief with a new portfolio, new responsibilities. Captain Reed has left the 3rd District, and he's now doing some special training. So he's been elevated as well. So we're going to have to train up our new captain, our new commander. And we usually have good relationships with the 3rd District people. and look forward to hearing, I guess, a predictable response from them about what they think about this legislation, and look forward to seeing what happens at the county council and the public safety committee. So Joanna, thank you so much for sharing your expertise. Jordy, nice meeting you. For those of you who didn't know, Joanna did speak to one of our groups, Progressive Legacy, a few weeks ago on this issue, and we were so intrigued by her and the conversation and the issue that we wanted to share with a larger group. So thank you all for participating this evening, and we'll see you soon. Joanna.
Thank you so much for having us. Really, really appreciate it, Alan. Thanks, guys. Great to see you all.
Thank you, guys.